All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Rachel. I'm the community leader here at Crowdsourcing Sustainability, and we're absolutely thrilled to be joined by Katrina Erwin today. Katrina's passion and knowledge and energy for community climate organizing is deeply impressive. So I'm really looking forward to her sharing herself with you all today. And I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over to Katrina and let her kind of introduce herself and dive right into all the great stuff she's got for you. Feel free to put questions in the chat as they come up. And yeah, let's just get rolling.
Hi, Rachel. So first off, thank you so much for your kind words. And thank you so much for everyone for taking the time out of their day and their lunch break for joining me today and learning how you could be a local climate leader. Like Rachel said, my name is Katrina Erwin, and I'm calling in from Miami, Florida. And I'm really excited just to educate and empower you all to be leaders in your community. I do just want to preface that this presentation is extremely US focused, and that's for two reasons. First off, I have only participated in advocacy in the US, and that is the levels of government and advocacy that I feel the most comfortable talking about. I do hope to participate in international advocacy in the future. And secondly, that's because we are very fortunate here in the United States that we do have the platform to participate in the democratic process. There are a lot of countries and activists out there that do not have the same opportunities we do when it comes for advocacy. In some countries, it is illegal, or they do not have the framework to participate in the governmental process. They cannot petition. They cannot protest. They cannot speak with their elected officials. They cannot speak out if they are not happy with something that the government is doing, which is why it is so important that we take part in the democratic process and make sure we are doing what we are supposed to do to make sure that the government is moving toward climate action. So a little bit about me. I actually have only been involved with climate advocacy for 3.5 years now. And I also didn't major in climate advocacy or environmental policy in college. I actually was a communications and a minor in international affairs major in college. And I'm telling you that just to let you know that you don't have to be an expert to be able to speak and be an advocate when it comes to climate. And what really got me interested in joining the climate movement is because when I was in college, I read a book, and this book talked about all the ways that mayors, local governments, and cities could do things to implement climate action. It also talked about what we could do at the federal and national level. And this book, yes, it obviously did talk about the impacts to the climate crisis, but one thing that it really did focus on was the solutions. And when I was reading this book, I got so angry because I thought these impacts that I was reading about were so scary, but the solutions exist and we aren't doing anything to act on it. And that's when I realized that the key to solving the climate crisis and the number one solution actually is participating in political advocacy. And that's when I decided to change my entire life goal. And I applied for an internship with a climate organization here in Florida called the Clio Institute. I was an intern there, and then I ended up becoming a program coordinator, an associate program manager, and a youth advocacy program manager. And if it wasn't for the Clio Institute, I actually wouldn't know anything that I'm about to be talking to you all about today. Before I started getting involved in advocacy, I didn't know who my elected leaders were. And when I got involved with advocacy, I realized how important it was to be a part of the political process. And the first time I was a part of the political process was actually in 2021 when I was living in Tallahassee because I went to Florida State. And when I was living in Tallahassee passed a clean energy plan, which was really exciting. But the advocacy group that I was working for, we found out that this clean energy plan actually had mention of fracked gas in it, aka natural gas. And we have to make sure that we're calling it fracked gas or methane gas because that's what it is. And as you know, methane gas is extremely bad for climate mitigation. So I went with my group to City Commission, and it was 3 of us just to talk about how messed up it was that fracked gas was in this clean energy plan, and we have to do something about it. I was absolutely terrified. I did not want to speak in front of the commission, and the only reason I did was because I had to for my job. And I spoke in front of commission, and what ended up happening is the City Commission listened to what I said, and they spoke about my organization and the work that we're doing and how they wanted to work with us. And my comments were also featured in the local newspaper. I'm not telling you this story to show off. I am telling you how important it is to be a part of the political process in your local community, because just showing up can make a huge difference. And ever since then, I have continued to be a part of the political process in my community. I have brought others into the process, even though I've been scared, even though I've been nervous, because it has been so incredible to see the changes that I have been able to make in my local community. And ever since I was inspired by that, I moved back down to Miami because that is ground zero for the climate crisis. And I've had some local wins that I'm really excited about. My second experience in advocacy was in September of 2021 when I first moved back to Miami. And I was so excited because when I was in Tallahassee, I heard that Miami was doing so many great things for the climate that they even created a resilience office, which was tasked with helping to prevent Miami from sinking. Sea level rise, as you know, Miami is ground zero for that. And during budget season here in City of Miami and in Miami-Dade County, for those of you that don't know, all of our local governments have an annual budget that they go over at the beginning of their fiscal year. So they were looking over the budget and they were figuring out what they wanted to do with each portion of the budget. And they actually wanted to take away funding from the Resilient Office here in Miami. A lot of local groups, a lot of justice activists, a lot of young people thought that this was really messed up and this is not what we should be doing, because instead of defunding this office, we should actually be providing more funding to this office. So what I did is I went with a bunch of young people, a bunch of climate organizations, and we went and we spoke at City Hall. And so many of us showed up and so many of us cared that my local government actually listened. And instead of taking away funding from this office, they actually gave even more funding than we were asking for and provided the office with almost $500,000 in funding, which I just thought was so absolutely incredible. And I really had no idea that my involvement in local government could do that. I've also advocated for more youth representation at the local level. I secured 2 youth seats on the City of Miami's Climate Resilience Committee. I've also worked with Miami-Dade County to create a mayoral youth roundtable, which I also serve in. And I also worked with other organizations to secure funding for a chief heat officer position. Here in Miami-Dade County, it is getting really, really hot, and we want to make sure that we are protecting our community members from the impacts of extreme heat. And a lot of commissioners on Miami-Dade County actually didn't want to provide the funding for the chief heat officer position. And myself and a lot of organizations, we all went at the budget hearing and we told them that we wanted the budget to go to this, and that also ended up being approved. So these are just some of the local wins that I've been a part of. And I also want to make it clear that none of these were things that I've done by myself. This was a movement, and I worked with other organizations, young people, and different individuals to make sure that we're getting this done, because we really are stronger together. So in order for us to be involved with the advocacy process, we do need to know about the different levels of government that we have here in the United States. You have the federal government, the state government, the county government, and our municipal governments. So the federal government, obviously, that is the largest system of government in the US. It is the system of government that we pay the absolute most attention to. They regulate the law of the land, they regulate spending. And, you know, when I was a freshman in college, I actually didn't even know who my elected officials were. I didn't know who my Senate or House representatives were. So I do want to take the time, if you don't know who your elected officials are that represent you at the federal level, to take out your phone and scan the QR code to find that out. Rachel's also going to be dropping the link in the chat. And I would love if everyone could just share who their elected leaders are in the chat box as well. Fun fact, even though it is hard to access your federal elected leaders, they actually do have district offices back at home. and you could speak to them at their district office, and you could speak with a member of staff to talk to them about your concerns. So I am going to wait to get people to write down in the chat who their elected leaders are, because I think it's really important that we know that. And while everyone is scanning that QR code, I also do want to point out some things that the federal government has recently done. As you know, last year in August, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. That is the law of the land. And even though it is so important that we are demanding the federal government do things on climate, it is even more important that once something, when it comes to climate, gets passed, that we are actually utilizing what the federal government is giving us. The Inflation Reduction Act helps to provide regular people with affordable access to energy efficient appliances that helps them to be more climate friendly and helps them to save money. We need to make sure that we are taking advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act and sharing it with people in our community. I also gave Rachel a QR code as well that she's going to be putting in the chat so you all could figure out how you can access the Inflation Reduction Act and how to get your money from it. Secondly, another thing that I want to point out, because the federal government does have power of the purse, in April of this year, the Biden-Harris administration announced that they were going to be investing almost $500 million in funding to natural climate solutions. And this is really exciting, but this really great budget was passed about a month after the Willow Project was passed. And for those of you who don't know what the Willow Project is, it is a giant oil drilling operation that's going to be happening in Alaska. As you all know, when it comes to climate mitigation, that is the last thing we should be doing. And the federal government has the right to allow drilling in federally owned lands. Even though Willow ended up getting passed, there are a lot of organizations out there that are trying to sue the federal government and get the Willow Project to be stopped. So Rachel's also going to be inputting a petition in this chat that you all can sign, and I urge you all to share with your friends and family. If you all haven't noticed by now, this presentation is going to be very, very action focused, because not only do we want to learn about what's going on, we want to take action and we want to make sure that we are acting on climate. So another thing, even though I said the federal government is most removed from the people, there are a lot of ways to access it. We can even call the White House. So the White House actually has a comment line that is open every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. So the White House hotline is going to be open after this call. I have used that White House hotline on 2 occasions before. The first one was to ask the White House to pass a climate emergency declaration, and the second one was to ask the White House to stop Willow. So take a photo of this on your phone, share with your friends and family. It's important that we know how to access the White House, because a lot of people don't know this, and I didn't know this until last year. And like I said, I've been in advocacy for almost 3.5 years. So our state government, this is kind of when we start to see the general public kind of stop paying attention to what's going on, which that's not a good thing, because our state government really enforces a lot of laws that we are directly seeing in our community and our state. So like I said before, I'm from Florida, and our state government here is cuckoo crazy. And I'm sure a lot of people on this call might actually know what's going on more in Florida than they do in their own state government. And that's because Florida is getting a lot of national attention. So I am interested if anyone can put in the chat if they actually feel like they might know more about what's going on in Florida than in their state government. I'm really interested in that, because we're getting so much national attention, but I really urge you all to pay attention to what's going on in your state government. And even those of you that live in Florida, look up what's going on in Florida more than what's the news is being posted about. There actually might be even worse laws that just aren't getting headlines in your state. And just so you know, so you can kind of navigate how your state government works, state governments are only voting in an active session for 3 months out of the year. So Google when your state government is active, make sure that you know how to call your elected officials, make sure that you know how to go and speak at your state legislator, because we actually all have the right to go up to our state government every legislative session, meet with our elected officials, and actually go to committee hearings and speak for or against a bill. We have the right. You don't have to be a lobbyist, and you don't have to have any sort of special connections to be able to speak there. And now we're going to go to our county and municipal government. And this is the type of government that we have the most access to, that we see the most impacts from in our community, and we're paying the least amount of attention to it. Like I said before, I will always be the first to say I didn't know anything, and I didn't know who my elected officials were in my local government until 2022. And that didn't do me any good, because I need to know who's serving me at the local level. Our local government is so important. They manage countywide programs that implement transportation, emergency operations, zoning, land use, and even provide local funding. They represent a larger amount of people than municipal governments. They can create countywide ordinances. For those of you that don't know what an ordinance is, a great example of it is your county can pass an ordinance that bans plastic bags in your area. That's a great example. So it's basically a law that applies just for the area that you're in. And they also deal with larger issues such as housing. Our municipal government, even more than our county government, we have the most say in what goes on in our municipal government and impacts us the most. And we're paying even less attention to this than we are to anything else. When I tell you that the times that I've gone to a city commission meeting for a local government and they actually listen to me and do what I say and they want to work with me, that happens all the time, because barely anyone participates in local government, and we need to change that. On top of it too, your city government can pass a lot of really great things, and it can pass a lot of really bad things. For example, the city of Miami, they were trying to defund and take away funding from the Office of Resilience. That is a city government that was doing that. So pay attention to what your city government is doing and make sure that you are taking action. Another thing that's really great about city governments is they heavily utilize community boards. This is a really great way for you to get involved and have a say in what's going on with your local government. I also want to point out that there's different types of local government too. So before you can even go about learning how to advocate in your local government community, you need to know what type of local government you have. There's council commission, there's council manager local governments, which is the first most popular one. The second most popular one is mayor council, where we have a mayor that has a lot of power, and then we have the commission that is also working with them. Then we have a standard commission government. And then when we get to smaller towns, we have town meetings, which all the members of the town will go to and make decisions. And then we have representative town meetings, where representatives will be chosen from the community and they will work with the community and make decisions. If you're interested in what type of local government your area has, Rachel dropped the QR code there. Well, the QR code is in the slide, but Rachel dropped the link in the chat. So take a look at this and figure out what type of local government you have, because that's the best way to navigate it. So, local government and climate. Like I said, a lot of people, when it comes to climate, they care so much about what's going on in the federal level than in their local government. And I think we need to change the way that we're looking at that. And we have to look at our local governments as climate solutions. The reason I got into the climate fight was because I read a book about how mayors and local governments can make climate cities that can change and mitigate the impacts of greenhouse gases. And the best thing that I can think of is, do y'all remember back in 2017 when President Trump said that he was going to pull out of the Paris Accord because he doesn't rep the citizens of Paris? Well, in response to that, the mayor of Pittsburgh said that the president does not represent the citizens of Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh decided to stay in the Paris Accord. Pittsburgh took action on climate. And we started to see a lot of areas across the country and small towns taking action on climate. We saw towns passing renewable energy plans, creating electric bus fleets, implementing more renewable energy. because our counties and our towns can actually mitigate and reduce the amount of greenhouse gases we have in our atmosphere. We could do that at a small scale and it can still make a difference. Local governments, as I mentioned, they're responsible for a lot of things that can mitigate greenhouse gases, such as public transportation, zoning, buildings. And on top of that as well, there's also a study in California that found that roughly 35% of all carbon footprints from statewide use are actually from activities that partially are within control of local governments. We can do something about it. And another thing to mention when it comes to local governments is it's also important that climate action is not one size fits all. The best thing for our city may not be the best thing for another city. So this really gives us the opportunity to create climate adaptation and mitigation solutions that work best and benefit the people in our area. And you can directly see how you are starting to get more access to clean air, clean water, and cooler communities. On top of that as well, a lot of foundations have even recognized the impact that local government has on climate. A couple years ago, the Rockefeller Foundation announced the 100 Resilient Cities program, which is no longer a thing, but they provided a bunch of fundings to cities that applied for this grant. And it was all about getting cities the proper tools that they needed to adapt to sea level rise and other climate impact issues. I know Miami, Miami-Dade County, and South and Miami Beach actually applied for this program, and it helped to create something that we have here in Florida called resilient officers. Not every city or county in Florida have resilience officers, but basically what they do is they help your community adapt to the impacts of climate change. So I definitely implore you all to look up if your city was a part of the 100 Resilient Cities program and to see if your city has a resilient officer and a resilient office. Another thing that a lot of cities were doing were they are starting to adopt climate action plans. It's basically a really detailed framework which shows ways that your county and your city can implement ways to mitigate the impacts of greenhouse gases and reduce them in your area. Climate action plans are extremely important when it comes to mitigation, and a lot of cities and counties have been passing them. As you can see here are kind of the top 10 themes from most US cities' climate action plans. The first one is energy efficient buildings. I'm really excited to see that environmental justice is on there. So take a look at this. And another QR code that I added also shows if your city or county has a climate action plan. Please scan this QR code or click on the link that Rachel will be dropping in the chat so you could figure out if your city has a climate action plan. And if your local government doesn't have a climate action plan, reach out to an elected leader, ask them why. Maybe you could start being the driving movement in your community that gets your local government to pass a climate action plan. And for those of you that do have a climate action plan or a clean energy plan in your city, read it. Like I mentioned before, City of Tallahassee had methane gas in their clean energy plan. So it's important that we read it. And if we see something that we have an issue with, we take it up with our local elected officials and get them to change it through political advocacy. I'm also interested if anyone did scan or click on the QR code or click on the link. So Rachel just put the link in the chat. I wanted to check on that. So I want everyone to click on that link. And while I'm talking about this slide, put in our chat if your local government has a clean energy plan or a climate action plan. I also want to give shout outs to cities that are acting on climate across the United States and in different regions. This was also really fun for me because I know that a lot of people, a part of crowdsourcing sustainability, are from different areas in the United States. So I was able to look up things going on in different areas. So in the Pacific region, we're seeing Honolulu catalyzing more on rapid bus lane implementation. Anchorage, Alaska adopted a climate action plan, which strives for the city to reduce carbon emissions by 80% from 2008 levels by 2050 and set an interim reduction goal of 40% by 2030. A city in California actually created a community-wide carbon neutrality plan by 2035, and it's actually one of the most ambitious plans in the nation. San Jose is co-creating a building decarbonization strategy, In the Northeast, I saw that we have some people in the Northeast. Boston is implementing systems to increase transit use. Pittsburgh is rethinking the budget to free up funds for climate action. Remember how I said budget in local government is really important, and Pittsburgh is making sure that they are prioritizing climate in their local budget. And the New York City Council passed the Climate Mobilization Act, which helps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from and improve energy efficiency for certain buildings in New York City. And these are all things that were passed through local governments, and local activists were able to work with their commission to help pass. Got to give some love for other regions in the United States. In the Southwest, Denver is developing a green workforce. Phoenix, the city council approved an interim greenhouse gas emission reduction goal of 30% below 2012 levels by 2025. And the Southeast, counties in Florida created the Southeast Climate Compact. So for those of you that live in Florida, there is something called the Southeast Climate Compact, and Miami-Dade County, Monroe County, Palm Beach, and Broward County are a part of it. And it's different counties that are acting on climate and have resilience offices, and they're working together as a team and sharing best practices as well as solutions that they have found to help protect their communities from climate. And Savannah also is making sure that all energy consumed in the city is generated from renewable energy by 2035, and all other energy needs will be renewable by 2050. And finally, the Midwest. In Indianapolis, they're building capacity to deliver climate action. Chicago's new climate goals is setting course to reduce the city's carbon emissions by 62% by 2040. And in Columbus, Ohio, they are promoting environmental justice goals in their clean energy plan. And like I said, these are all things that community members and commissions worked on. And if you live in any of these communities and you're reading this and you're like, I think that this is too ambitious, or I don't like that, reach out to your elected leaders, be a part of your commission. I am telling you, it is so easy to be a part in local government and make a difference. And I just think examples of cities acting on climate, this shows how much we really can make a difference at the local level. And our local government could also set a framework for our state government and our federal government, because if it worked in our community, other levels of government are going to look in our community for ways that it has worked for them to implement it as well. And there's also lots of local policies that you could advocate for when you're speaking to city commissions that support climate mitigation. As you could see, I put a couple of them here. And this is one example that I really, really love. When it comes to increasing public transportation, it's really important that we're thinking smart when we're creating bus stops. So this is a bus shelter that actually has solar panels on top of it. So not only is it providing shade for people, it's also helping to produce energy. So take a quick read and read about some of the local policies that are supporting mitigation. There's also a lot of local policies that I've worked on that support adaptation. Here in Miami, we are really advocating for more septic to sewer. It's important to implement more climate solutions. Retention ponds are really important. We need to increase access to cooling spaces because of how bad and how much worse heat is going to be in our communities. And I really just want to talk about here, I really love natural climate solutions. And this photo here shows a natural climate solutions, which are mangroves, which are helping to replace seawalls. So instead of, making it so people aren't able to see the beautiful ocean, we're creating a natural climate solution that is going to help reduce the impact of sea level rise, flooding, while also having more trees and making our communities more breathable. So I'm really curious, and feel free to unmute yourselves because I am a very collaborative presenter. What type of climate initiatives would you all like to see in your community? And just feel free to unmute yourself and share.
I can go ahead and kick us off. I'm fairly new to New York City, and moving here, like, New York has a whole different relationship with trash than anywhere I've ever lived. And if you've ever been to New York, you probably experienced that, right? But so I would love to see a climate initiative in New York that is addressing like intersections of like food waste, composting, decreasing trash, and like more efficient recycling, because it just like it's just chaos. And I feel like that's a great opportunity to like solve a lot of multi-solve a lot of problems at the same time.
Thank you for sharing, Christy.
You took mine, Rachel, but yeah, definitely. I'm such an advocate for composting. It's such an underutilized solution as far as reducing methane emissions. And as you said, solving multiple problems. So addressing the soil crisis, as well as reducing landfill space that is taken up by food waste, and reducing emissions from so many different sources, whether it's the transportation of that food waste going to the landfill and everything. So I'm a huge advocate for expanding and supporting community composting organizations. Unfortunately, the way the infrastructure works right now is it's not supported by cities. Our property taxes go to support waste management as far as curbside pickup for things like trash and recycling, but not for food waste, not for organics in the way that it should be. And so in an ideal city, I would also see a bin for curbside pickup of food waste, for example, and that would greatly decrease what we're sending to the landfill and also contribute to those emission reductions. So that's what I would always advocate for.
Thank you, Christy. And just like you just said, these are things that you could advocate for. These are things that you could work with your local government on. And for some of you, it might be possible that the things that you want to see in your local government might actually already be in the process of being implemented. So make sure to always do your research and figure out if your local government has these initiatives. And if not, why not? Does anyone else want to share any initiatives that they want to see? Well, that's okay. Oh, I see Will raise their hand. Go ahead, Will.
Hey there. I was just talking with somebody over coffee this morning about the municipalization of utilities and what we can do to limit the shareholder model of energy production and distribution. And I've been tinkering with ways to help people electrify their lives. But there's sort of a deeper, like, democratic issue that we can affect at the local level about the role that energy plays in our lives. And so I'm on the west side of Michigan. On the other side of the state, Ann Arbor is far along in their research to figure out, whether or not they could have their own city-based municipal utility, and they could have a lot more agency over their production and distribution of clean energy in the city. So I think that is a possible way forward for a lot of us.
Yeah, have you considered talking to Ann Arbor and seeing if they would be interested in working with your city?
Yeah, there's definitely some collaboration, and we do have a sustainability office, which is, has limited resources in the sense that they have to balance a budget with a bunch of other departments as well. But there's some advocacy happening in that direction and some sharing of experiences. Yeah.
That's awesome to hear. Thanks for sharing. If no one else wants to share, that's totally okay. Keep ruminating on what you want to see in your city. And maybe after this presentation, you'll have that aha moment, and that's going to be what you're going to continue to be pushing for. So now that we learned a little bit about how our governmental process works and advocacy and climate action, let's start navigating civic communication and action, because this is really important. So there are some things that you all can do right now. And the first one is get to know who your elected officials are, their committee assignments, if applicable, and their positions on issues. Introduce yourself via email or in person, and attend an upcoming community event or town hall to support or pressure your elected official. So before we can do any of that, we do need to know who represents us. And I have some QR codes here where you could find out who represents you at the county level and who represents you at the city level. So take out your phone and do that right now. Rachel's also putting a link in the chat. So figure out who your elected leaders are. And I'm going to take a moment for some people to be putting that in the chat, because we cannot take any action if we don't know who's serving us first. Okay, I see Rachel's elected leader is Eric Adams. Do you know if he represents you at the county or city level?
Well, he's the mayor of New York, but that's like of New York City, but that's the only name I'm seeing through that link.
Mm-hmm. What about in the city one too?
Yeah, I'm looking at the city one.
A lot of municipalities are also weird and different. So when I was living in Tallahassee, the county didn't have a mayor, but Tallahassee had a mayor. And we would have some commissioners that were representing all of us, and we would have some commissioners that weren't. So it's definitely like really weird to figure out who's representing you in your county and who isn't. I didn't know any was county ones. Crystal Hudson. Okay, good. I'm glad we were able to see that. Well, now do you know who your county elected leaders are, Ryan?
I do now.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. So we can keep working on that later on in the call. And please share these links with everyone you know so they could figure out who their elected leaders are. And now that you know who your elected leaders are, let's see if you even like them. Let's research what their climate policies are. For all you know, they could be great on climate or they could be really bad. They're representing you. So let's do that research to see if they're representing you and your community correctly. So other things to mention, now that we know who our elected officials are, we have to figure out how to contact them. It's important to know what municipality and county you're already located in, which we figured out already. And there's different ways that you could find your elected officials' email. The first way is you could find it on your government's website. If it's not there, you could call the city clerk's office, which is on the government's website, and ask for the elected officials' email. Pro tip. It is actually better to have the email of their staff members and to form relationships with their staff members than the elected official. Because the regular email that you see on your government's website, depending on how big your local government is or how busy your elected officials are, the less likely that email is actually going to be used to respond to you. So when you call your city clerk, ask for your elected official's email and ask for one of their schedulers' email, and email your elected official and CC one of their staffers. That is the best way to secure a meeting. So want to remind everyone that. And if you get a good relationship with their staffer, your foot is in the door and that will be it. You are going to have a really good relationship with that elected officials team and you'll be able to get a lot of work done with them. There's also different ways that we can pressure our elected officials. If we don't like what they're doing, we can contact our local news stations. We could write op-eds to local papers. Like I said, we could testify at commission or council meetings, and we could also be a part of email campaigns. So there are a lot of different ways that we could work together to help pressure elected officials. But there's different times when it's important to make sure that we're utilizing them. And sometimes it's good to utilize a protest and other times it's not. So to act or not to act. And it really just depends. Attending and speaking at commission in favor or in disagreement with an item is always a really great option. Email campaigns are normally used for very high stake items. Phone calls are used to target an elected official who's a key voting member on an important issue. Media is best used to bring awareness to the issue, garner advocacy, and educate decision makers or community members. Sit-ins and protests are normally used as a last resort to show large-scale support or dissent for an item that will have a large impact on the community. And depending on how big your action is, some advocacy requires all forms of actions, which involves meeting with elected officials, op-eds, email campaigns, speaking at commission, and protest. And there was something that I was involved in here in Miami that we had to do all of those things on, which I'm going to be talking about in a few more slides. But one other thing that I just wanted to share with you all as well was the different ways that you could also directly get involved with your elected official, which is to make sure that you're building relationships with them and just really getting involved with your community. I actually most recently decided that I wanted to get really involved with my city government. And so I live in an area called Coral Gables, and Coral Gables, Florida actually has one of the most aggressive policies when it comes to how the community looks. So I was walking around Coral Gables and I noticed that all the grass here was just the average lawn grass that we have. And if you don't know that, the grass that we have in our lawns, depending on where you live, is actually really bad for the environment because it's not native. So I was wondering, does Coral Gables allow us to have native Florida grass? So I ended up calling my city clerk while I was on my morning walk, and they connected me with the sustainability manager. And I started talking to the sustainability manager, and he told me about all the ways that we actually can have native Florida grass in our community. And I said, wow, a lot of my community members don't do this. And I asked them ways that they're educating people. And then he informed me that there's an open seat on the sustainability board in Coral Gables. And now I'm working with him to try to get a seat on it. So just that one call of figuring out if I was allowed to have native Florida grass in my community led to creating a deeper relationship, which is going to get me even more continuously involved with my local government. So like I mentioned before, when it comes to commission meetings, that really, in my opinion, is the best way to get involved. It's really important to know how they work because they're kind of weird. City and county council or commission meetings typically happen year-round. They're always televised, and the chairman typically makes the rules of how each meeting will be conducted. So each commission has a chairman, they always switch, and the chairman will tell you how much time you're able to speak. They'll allow you to clap. Here in Miami-Dade County, we used to have a really strict chairman that didn't allow you to say anything mean or comment about any of the elected officials there, or he would stop you from speaking. So it's important to know what rules your chairman has. As I mentioned before, there's also budget meetings that happen once or twice a year, depending if your local government conducts biannual budgets. In order for an item to pass, it must have a sponsor and a majority of the vote. And citizens are often allowed to speak at meetings to submit public comment on an agenda item or a general concern they have. Like I said, whether or not you're allowed to speak about anything is up to the chairman of the commission. If the chairman decides that you could only speak on an agenda item, that's it. And a chairman could decide that they're not going to be taking public comment. You really need to make sure what type of chairman you have in your community because it can impact your political process a lot. But like I said, anyone can speak at commission meetings. Please be a part of them. Please encourage people to do it. It is so, so, so important. And if you can't make a commission meeting, watch the televised event and you could figure out what's going on. So when it comes to testifying at commission meetings, like I said, public comment is always welcomed. And it's really important that when you're testifying, you're presenting professionally and stay true to the facts and take a knowledge approach. You screaming at your elected leaders, even though it's amazing and it could definitely be therapeutic to do that, that might not often be the best approach. And because of that, it could actually hurt you. So it's really important that you are staying professional when it comes to your cause. Prepare your testimony beforehand. I normally love to write my testimony on my phone and I read it out loud. I promise it doesn't reduce any of your credibility, and be prepared in some cases to answer questions. And if you don't know the answer to the question, you can always say, I don't know the answer, but I know some experts and I'm happy to set up a meeting with you and the experts, and that helps to continue the dialogue. And secondly, always make sure that you're thanking the chair and the commission members for their time. And here's an example of me speaking at a commission meeting.
Coral Gables, Florida, 33146. I am here to ask you all to vote no on the UDB expansion. I am deeply concerned about the false claims by the developer that says this project will supply jobs to South Dade residents in the long run. This is a blatant lie. The Technology Village will not help to grow jobs for residents in the South Dade region, but instead will further contribute to gentrification in their area and will kick residents out of their homes. The Technology Village will give jobs to those from out-of-state tech hubs such as California and New York, which will also contribute to higher rent in Miami-Dade County, an issue we are already struggling with. Miami-Dade is in a housing emergency, and expanding the UDB will only contribute to that. Please vote no on the UDB expansion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
So basically, if you all haven't noticed by now, I did not mention stopping the UDB as one of my wins. And this was an advocacy action that unfortunately failed. And here in Miami, this might be something in your local community as well. We have something called the Urban Development Boundary Line, which is an invisible line that basically is created to not allow developers to move past that line, or else it will cause environmental issues. This ended up being approved. They wanted to create a tech village. And just so you all know, this tech spillage was so bad for the environment through the expansion of the UDB line that Senator Marco Rubio and the mayor of Miami-Dade County, who is a Democrat, wrote an op-ed together saying that this is a bad idea. The Florida Department of Environmental Regulation told them not to do it. County offices told them not to do it, and the commission still decided to do it, which just shows how much power and money there is in politics. And the reason that I'm mentioning this as well is because this was a really scary, important thing that was going to cause a lot of climate and environmental disasters. But if you listen to the speech that I just gave, I did not give one mention of climate. And that's because it's really important to change your messaging depending on who you're speaking to. The developer's claim was that this was going to be great for the economy and this is going to be bringing more jobs. And whenever developers try to say that to you, that you have to choose the environment or the economy, that is a lie. And there is always a way for the environment and the economy to thrive. So like I said, it's really important to change your messaging depending on who you're speaking to, because I really just used the messaging that the developer was using and turned it back on them.
Coral Gables, Florida, 331.
So in my 3.5 years working in advocacy, there are a couple things that I've learned. It's important to show up and empower others to show up as well. There are other ways for people to join the fight besides going to City Hall. Meet people where they're at. If you have a friend who is really busy all the time and they're always complaining on Instagram about issues that they have with the government and they're not doing anything about it because they can't go to commission, tell them, here's the number to call your local government, call your elected leader, and tell them that you have an issue with this. That was another campaign that we implemented during the urban development boundary line fight. We had a lot of people call their elected leader and ask them to vote no on this issue if they weren't able to go to commission. It's also important to do research on the elected officials you're targeting and to change your messaging based on who you're talking to. Connect across issues. Communication is so key, and be welcoming to others. I have been a part of a lot of groups where some people in the groups are so technical that some people are nervous about joining the movement because they don't feel like they belong there, because they don't feel like they're as smart or as knowledgeable as everyone. So always make sure that you're welcoming and you're communicating in a way that makes it easy for people to understand. Always continue to educate. Joyful resistance is so important. We have a lot of losers in the climate movement, and it's important to continue to bring joy and continue to resist, because if we are burnt out, we cannot continue fighting. Community is everything. And the best way to bring people into the movement is by presenting them with small actionable steps, then inviting them to in-person events. So the best thing that I can tell anyone, if you have anyone on Facebook or Instagram or any form of social media that is always complaining about what's going on, message them and say, hey, what steps have you taken to actually do something about it? It's one thing to complain. It's another thing to actually act. Let's make sure that the people that are complaining who care are starting to take action about what's going on. There's all these other ways that you can contribute to the movement too. It's important to be a good activist. Make sure to give rides to other activists, fund initiatives that help support advocacy, proofread speeches and help with talking points if you're an expert, help people get published if you have connection to local newspapers, give space to others, seek guidance and advice from local leaders and frontline community members. That is so important to do that. I do know that we're short on time, but I quickly want to just share an anecdote about how one time, this was before I moved to Tallahassee, but I met a really great social justice climate warrior there. Her name is Talithia Edwards. And Talithia got into the climate movement because there was a tree that the city of Tallahassee was going to knock down. White environmentalists, and I'm saying white for a reason, white environmentalists did not want the tree to be knocked down, and they were protesting against the knocking down of the tree. Meanwhile, Talithia, a Black woman, wanted the tree to get knocked down because this tree actually represented a lot of horrible things that happened to the Black community in Tallahassee. And they were working separately on this issue. And then Talithia got the chance to talk to the white environmentalist about how harmful having this tree was to the Black community. And the environmentalist actually listened, and they were on her side. And I'm saying that because we need to be seeking guidance from people and make sure that we're always prioritizing justice in our advocacy. If you speak multiple language, make sure that you're helping with translation. There are a lot of people out there that do not speak the same language of your local government, and that's making it that they aren't being able to advocate. So help with translation anytime you can. Uplift the work of other activists and support their initiatives. And above all, be kind, empathetic, and a team player. We are nothing without our advocacy community, and we need to support each other so we're not getting burnt out. I also want to make sure and tell everyone that we need to be looking up what local nonprofits are in our area, because we can't be doing advocacy without them. A lot of nonprofits will do all the work for you. Nonprofits in most cases will train you how to speak to elected officials. They'll tell you how to look at agendas. They'll tell you about what's going on. They'll help you with rides. They'll give you all the education materials you need. They'll put your foot in the door. And most importantly, they can make sure that you're working together with other people and not just by yourself. These are just an example of some of the nonprofits that I've learned from and work with in Miami. I want to give special love to Love the Everglades movement, because they've taught me how to be a better ally to Indigenous leaders in South Florida. There's also other advocacy methods that you could be a part of. Be active in your homeowner association. Parents and students, be active with your PTA, go to the school board meetings, follow your state's public service commission. For those of you who don't know what a public service commission is, they actually regulate your utility company. So make sure that you're following what they're doing, because you can actually make a lot of change in your public service commission and submit public comment. Stay active and up to date with your state's legislative session. Here in Florida, we actually ended up passing bills that take away a lot of local governments' rights to have ordinances. So what's going on in our state's legislative session could directly impact our local government. Make sure to volunteer at community events, educate your friends and family, and support others. And advocacy works. This is just an example of some of the advocacy initiatives that I've passed here in Florida through working with organizations. And I also have a bit of homework that I want to share with you all. I want you all, after this call, to familiarize yourself with local government's website and where to find upcoming meeting information such as agendas, research, and get in touch with local nonprofits to learn how you can get involved in your community, and find out who your elected officials are and set up a meeting with them via email. Here's a sample email for those of you that don't know how to, format the email for your elected official. You say, "Hello, Commissioner, my name is blank. I'm a constituent. I'm very passionate about blank. I would love the opportunity to meet with you or a member of your staff to learn more about what your office is doing to support blank." And another thing that's really important, always give elected officials time that work for you, because they most likely will give a time that doesn't work. And because they're busy, it's important to give them time frames that they can make sure that their schedule's working around, and always make sure to insert your name and phone number. And finally, I just want to remind everyone that we are stronger together, and advocacy really, really does work. Make sure that we're working together as a community to implement change in our local government, because if it wasn't for all the people that I've worked with in advocacy, nothing would have been able to get done. So I do know the end of this ended up being a little bit rushed. I just wanted to be able to answer any questions that you all have. If there's any slides that you want me to go back on and talk about more, I definitely can. But thank you so much for everyone for attending this presentation. And I can't wait to see all the incredible things you do in your community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katrina. Yeah, if anybody has any burning questions, we have a couple minutes to answer them, but also we are going to send you these slides. So if there's a slide you want to look back at, you'll have all of that information. We'll send you all of the links that we shared today. And yeah, I mean, I think, this is just, I hope that this motivates you to we all got to get up off our butts, right? And get out from behind our screens. And the role of the government is not to come save us. We have to participate in this process. And like Katrina pointed out at the beginning, particularly if you live in the United States, it is an immense privilege that we really take for granted. So thank you so much, Katrina, for inspiring us to use that. Yeah, as always, let us know what you're working on in the CS community so that we can support each other and be inspired by each other. And Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading the comments as I'm talking, and that's just too much for my brain. All right, y'all. I think that is it for the day. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. Yeah, any questions that come up, feel free to reach out, and we'll look forward to following along on your local advocacy journeys.
If I could say one thing before I leave.
Absolutely.
Because I wanted to make sure I was answering questions. If you all do not know what your Public Service Commission is, it is the most important political body that you know that no one knows about. Like I said, they regulate your utility companies. They are your utility company's boss. And that is a great way that we could stop horrible things from happening from our state. So just for an example, a big utility company in my state was trying to use more methane gas as well as heighten our utility bills. And because of a petition campaign that myself and other organizations worked on, we were able to stop them. So just make sure that you're following what's happening in your Public Service Commission. It is so, so, so important. And I see Will has a question. Thank you, Will.
Oh yeah, what was that book that you read? Sue Patrick was asking in the chat.
Yeah, I put it in the chat. It was called Hope by Michael Bloomberg and Carl Pope. Looking back on it, this was the beginning of my climate journey, and it doesn't focus that much on justice. So just want to kind of let everyone know that it's not a very big justice book.
And if you're looking for good climate books, I can also include this in the follow-up, but we have a great list article, like CS has a great article with some really fantastic climate books. So I can include that too. All right, y'all, have a great rest of your day and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone.